Didier Drogba, Todd Boehly, and the Chelsea Chasm, a legend reflects on then versus now. Chelsea has always been a club that moves like a storm. Quick decisions, big expectations, and the kind of identity that can feel eternal, even when the personnel changes every few seasons. For most fans, the real question isn't whether Chelsea is still Chelsea. The question is, which version of Chelsea is it now? The one that felt familiar under Roman Abramovich and the teams that Didier Drogba became synonymous with, or the evolving Chelsea, shaped by a new ownership era, new transfer mechanics, and a different footballing logic under Todd Boehly. In a conversation that sent a wave through supporters hungry for meaning behind the headlines, former Chelsea legend Didier Drogba offered an opinion that cut through the noise. He didn't speak like a pundit searching for easy controversy. He spoke like someone who had carried the club's emotional weight, someone who understood what it meant to build squads that didn't just win, but believed. And according to Drogba, when you look at Chelsea then and Chelsea now, you can clearly see the difference, not only in results, but in player quality and transfer policy. That point, simple on the surface, actually opens up a deep story about football management, identity, recruitment, and what happens when a club transitions from one era to another. The Chelsea Drogba knew, more than a squad, a system of belief. To understand Drogba's view, you have to revisit the Chelsea of his era, not just the famous faces or the silverware, but the structure behind it. Drogba arrived at a time when Chelsea was still searching for sustained dominance, and he became central to a transformation. What made Chelsea special in those years wasn't only talent, it was the combination of leadership, mentality, and ruthless competitiveness. Drogba wasn't simply an attacker, he was a focal point, a personality on the pitch, and a symbol of the club's competitive hunger. Even when games were tight, Chelsea felt like a team that had a plan for suffering, because suffering was part of the winning process. That might sound poetic, but it was visible in performances, late goals, stubborn defenses, and a willingness to fight for the ball like it mattered more than comfort. Behind that mindset, there was a transfer policy that often felt directed and decisive. Chelsea weren't always perfect, but the overall approach tended to bring players who could solve immediate problems and fit the club's demands, players who could deliver under pressure rather than just develop quietly for years. Drogba's Chelsea didn't feel like a project as much as it felt like a machine for results. The club could plan long-term, yes, but it also demanded immediate impact, and more often than not, that demand was met. The Boehly era began. A new ownership, a new blueprint. When Todd Boehly became part of the ownership group, it didn't just change Chelsea's finances, it changed the club's footballing architecture. You could almost see it in the language used by decision-makers: strategy, process, squad development, long-term value, data, and infrastructure. Those words can be good, they can also become a smokescreen when patience starts to replace urgency. Fans didn't just worry about spending, they worried about spending style. In the Boehly period, Chelsea went through a recruitment phase that many saw as radical. The club looked willing to bet heavily on potential, to invest in youth, and to treat the roster as a continually adjustable platform rather than a fixed team identity. Drogba's message, as reported in his comments, points directly to what this shift meant in practice. When you compare player quality and transfer policy, Chelsea looks totally different now. That's not necessarily an insult, it's an observation on football reality. Player quality and recruitment methods shape what a team becomes, on and off the pitch. Player quality, why potential isn't the same as proven. Chelsea's modern recruitment has often been discussed through the lens of upside. That's a legitimate modern football concept. The problem, though, is that upside doesn't always equal immediate mastery. In Drogba's era, Chelsea's teams featured players who were not only talented, but also battle-tested. They were accustomed to high-stakes matches. They understood the weight of expectation at Chelsea. They could handle intense pressure without becoming psychologically fragile.
In contrast, if a club spends in a way that prioritizes development over dominance, it may eventually produce a strong future team, but it can also create instability in the present. Drogba's reference to total difference in player quality reflects the frustration many fans feel, not simply that Chelsea buys players now, but that the level of reliability, the feeling that this player will change the match, doesn't always arrive in the same way. A legend doesn't usually speak about quality in abstract terms. He talks about it in terms of what he saw: players who could impose themselves, players who could be counted on when it mattered most, and players who could carry a club's atmosphere. That is what Chelsea's old teams offered consistently. Transfer policy, the philosophy behind the spending. The second half of Drogba's point, transfer policy, is where the real debate lives. Chelsea's transfer policy in the Drogba era often felt more like building a competitive identity. Targets were specific, and signings had a clear role. Even when Chelsea made mistakes, the overall approach usually aligned with what the club wanted on the pitch: players who could deliver under pressure. Under the Boehly ownership structure, recruitment became more expansive and sometimes less coherent to fans. The club seemed to cast wider nets across leagues and age groups. While Chelsea undoubtedly made some major signings, the overall feel could be inconsistent because recruitment was not always producing a stable core that could gel season after season. A club doesn't just need players, it needs continuity of chemistry. It needs an identity that players learn and protect. It needs a squad that understands each other's movements, emotional rhythms, and strategic instincts. If the transfer policy changes too rapidly, or if multiple recruitment plans overlap, it can create a squad that is talented but still searching for unity. That doesn't necessarily mean the players are bad, it means the club's football engine is still calibrating. Drogba's view essentially suggests that Chelsea's modern recruitment hasn't matched the clarity of the past, and if the past was built for immediate impact, the present might be built for long-term evolution. But the Premier League, as fans know, does not offer long-term evolution the way fans imagine. The Premier League punishes transitional seasons. What Drogba's opinion really means: identity, not just tactics. When Drogba says that there is a total difference, he's not speaking like a spreadsheet watcher. He's talking like someone who understands that a football club has a personality. Chelsea under Abramovich wasn't just about spending money, it was about spending money with intention. That intention created a certain type of football culture. The Chelsea spirit under Drogba's time was built on clutch character, performing when the stadium pressure peaks, dominance in key moments, big goals, decisive wins, leadership density, not just one captain, but many leaders, and fearlessness, the refusal to shrink against elite opponents. Now, if recruitment shifts and player quality feels different, the personality changes too. That's the deeper truth behind Drogba's comments. When the roster changes, the soul changes. Of course, clubs evolve, they must, but evolution without direction can look like chaos to supporters. And supporters measure chaos using two main metrics: results and coherence. Comparing the two eras, familiar strengths, different weaknesses. Let's compare the two Chelseas in the way Drogba's words invite us to. Then, a more ready-made mentality. Under the Chelsea Drogba knew, players often arrived with the ability to compete immediately. Even when Chelsea developed youngsters, the team's core frequently reflected proven quality. This made Chelsea feel like a club that could suffer and still win. Now, a more experimental structure. Under the Boehly era, Chelsea's system has shown signs of experimentation, sometimes very exciting, sometimes destabilizing. Talent can be present, but the club might be still learning how to transform talent into consistent performance quickly. That learning curve can be expensive when expectations remain as high as Chelsea's. The leadership problem, when the core doesn't stick. Another factor that fans often consider, whether or not Drogba explicitly said it, is the idea of a stable core. A team becomes dangerous when the squad has a group identity, a shared tactical vocabulary, and emotional unity built over multiple seasons. Chelsea and Drogba's era often had more continuity. That continuity allowed players to develop trust. Trust then becomes performance. In the modern era, changes in recruitment can fracture that trust. Even if the individual players are talented, the collective might not have the same time to lock in habits. So, when Drogba points to difference in quality and transfer policy, you can read between the lines. He may be pointing to how quickly Chelsea's roster transforms and what that does to performance. Money is not the issue, method is. One of the most misunderstood aspects of fan debates is the assumption that Chelsea's problem is simply spending, but Chelsea has always been able to spend. Drogba's comments, as described, focus elsewhere. If you spend without a consistent method, you can end up with players who don't form a coherent system, squad balance problems, and a team that changes too frequently to develop chemistry. The method, transfer policy, is the crucial part. Drogba's observation implies that Chelsea is not just spending differently, but recruiting differently. That difference